Hello and welcome to The Deep Dive. I'm Hannah Mullaney, Client Solutions Director at Savile Assessment, and each episode I'll be joined by an industry expert to discuss the hottest topics in assessment today. Let's dive in. Hi, Melissa. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Hi, Hannah. Good to be with you today.
Good. So, Melissa, I wonder if you could start us off by telling us a little bit about you and also a little bit about the work you do with your business, 80/20.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my name's Melissa Chester. I am a business psychologist and I am the co-founder of 80/20. So along with my co-founder, we work on individual, team and organisational development projects, drawing on our coaching, consulting and leadership backgrounds. Interestingly, we're structured in such a way that we split our work and our resources 80/20. So with 80% doing client work and 20% focused on pro bono work and donations, really supporting neurodivergent individuals and charities, really focused on accessibility and supporting neurodivergent clients. So hence the name 80/20.
Fantastic. And today, neurodiversity is our topic of conversation. What was it that first got you interested in the subject?
Well, I support someone close to me who is neurodivergent, and it's been a really steep learning curve. There's lots of things I've had to unlearn along the way, and I continue to learn every day. And I've experienced firsthand, I guess, the opposite of inclusion and how isolating and challenging it can be. But I've also had the privilege to see raw talent and potential develop in front of my eyes. So I think coming from a background as a business psychologist where you care about good work, you care about people in the workplace and that match being right and people being able to fulfill their potential, there's a real passion there around wanting to ensure that as many employers as possible see that talent and potential as well. Having had a fairly long career heading up people function and being accountable for resourcing and development, with that comes a lot of responsibility. You're literally, people's futures are literally in your hands. So I've invested in developing my knowledge of how to support neurodivergent individuals and combining that with my organisational knowledge to really drive that systemic change by building inclusion into structures and practices. That's something now that I'm focusing on. But yeah, it comes from a personal place.
I think you've probably articulated already there what I think the answer is to this next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just in case you've got something to add. It might seem like a little bit of an odd question, given that neurodiversity is such a hot topic. But I think when things become really hot topics, you can sometimes forget why they're hot. And so the question I want to ask is, why is neurodiversity and the discussion around neurodiversity right now so important to think about and consider?
Yeah, great question. So when I started off my journey about learning about neurodiversity, what surprised me the most was some of the rates of unemployment or underemployment, particularly the people who were autistic. So that just shocked me hugely, the rates of unemployment there. Alongside that, just generally knowing that 15 to 20% of the population are neurodiverse. I think as an employer, there's potentially, I've got people in my organisation who are neurodiverse and neurodivergent, and do I know who they are and are they getting the support that they need? And are we able to go out and offer employment and attract neurodivergent individuals? So if you're not focused on neurodiversity as part of your EDI, then you're missing potentially connecting with 15 to 20% of the population. So that's big. They're big numbers.
Absolutely.
So I think if you care about being an inclusive employer, neurodiversity has to be on the agenda. With neurodiversity comes diverse thinking, and what a great asset to any team having a neurodiverse thinker is. So thinking about actually potential, that the skills add, the culture add, the potential there for what you can achieve as a team, as an organisation, and well-being as well. I think well-being is an important link. More and more employers are investing in the well-being of their people. And we know that if you are neurodivergent, then the well-being, taking care of your well-being, ensuring the environment is right for you, that you're able to access the support that you need to for your own well-being, so you can be at your best, is really critical. So again, if you're an employer that cares about well-being, then you really do need to be caring about neurodiversity as well, and supporting your neurodiverse colleagues.
So the two go hand in hand. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. I don't think I've thought about it in that way before. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know that as part of your pro bono work, Melissa, you work specifically with neurodivergent individuals between the ages of 18 to 25 as part of that. Why is it so important to focus there on that age group?
So I think you've got a lot of transitions going on in that age group between 18 and we said 25 because maybe by 25 you're sort of settling into your career, potentially. So 18 to 25 just felt like a real key time when young people are going through potentially quite a few transitions. So it might be a transition from education straight to employment. It might be from education onto some training scheme, maybe as part of an apprenticeship or something. So not only are you learning, but you're also working. So big changes there. Or it may well be going from education through to university to continue your education and then on to employment. So a lot of change going on there. And there is no continuity of support. So you may be in school and have had certain adjustments in place to support you with your learning. It may be that with waiting lists as they are, time for diagnosis is taking quite a long time. So it could be that you might be leaving school just as you're getting a diagnosis. So then you haven't had certain support put in place that would have benefited you. How then do you transition through to perhaps the workplace or to university and know what you need? So how are those needs? So how do you get continuity so you've got those needs taken care of? And depending on your experience from school, university through, can really influence your level of knowledge of what's right for you. So by working with that group, we're able to help them really think about what their needs are. How do they learn at their best? What kind of learning environment might be right for them? Bringing in some of the career coaching into that work as well to help them, that age group, really identify where are their strengths, where are their motivations, where do their passions lie, what might that look like in terms of future study or work. So thinking about that, thinking about the best environment for them to go into and learn, and what they might need, what would be helpful for them. And really, the intention behind doing all of this is to help reduce those unemployment rates. But the really, really interesting space, I think, is around underemployment. So if your first job is not at a level that's commensurate with your ability, it's going to be harder to get to that role, that job that is commensurate with your ability. So if we can do early intervention and support to get that match right, to get that person and job right, hopefully we can set them up for success going forward, and that they know what they need in terms of support whilst they're learning or in the workplace, and that they can kind of advocate for themselves and communicate what their needs are.
Why is it so difficult to almost a kind of transition across to something that might be more aligned with your capability and potential. Do you think it's as difficult as it would be for anybody, or do you think neurodivergent individuals have particular challenges with that?
So I think if we say transitioning from school to university, so then you're going through quite a big change there. So an environment change, and sometimes for neurodivergent individuals, change is magnified in terms of what they're facing and preparing for that change. So there's lots of things you can do up front to help with that preparation for change and thinking about the environment you're going into and how you're going to cope and navigate that. But then moving from education to employment, I think there's still a number of barriers there where individuals may not necessarily be able to be given a platform to showcase their strengths. And they may well come with a very different profile to what might be seen as more neurotypical and more broader that you might then use to assess talent against. So there are barriers there to entry for some individuals, and employers just need to be mindful of those and think about how they remove some of those barriers so they can see the raw potential in front of them and see that actually they're going to be a great addition to the organisation.
And do you think the pandemic has had any specific impact on this group of individuals? And if so, what does that look like?
So I think if you were studying and doing exams during the pandemic, who knows? For some individuals, they may be impacted there in terms of their academic results because of the disruption and how that was all dealt with. I think coming from the pandemic, what we've had is vast technology improvements. So we've accelerated that shift towards virtual working. And that has many advantages. I think access to employment has improved for some individuals, but there are challenges as well as we move more towards the virtual hybrid working, where you may benefit from working virtually and having your environment just right. So being able to be in control of your environment and where you work and having that setup that works for you to do that focused work. But then particularly if you're early on in your career and you're learning, there are challenges around the lack of opportunity really for that, learning through osmosis, for a better phrase, just being able to pick up and learn and ask questions and like real learning on the job. So how do you make that work more in a virtual setting? So I think from the pandemic, it's opened up greater opportunities for flexibility. So I think people, where they can and they are allowed to have more control over their environment, that's a major factor, particularly for a number of people who are neurodivergent. And I think that shift more towards virtual working lends itself very nicely for a number of people. I think the risks are around learning, continuing to be able to learning informally, building that sense of belonging in a team, bonding as a team, building relationships. It can be more isolating. Some people prefer also to have more of a delineation between work and home. So actually having a routine, having a place of work to go to, some people really benefit from that. So if you don't have control over your environment, if you aren't able to access an office on a full-time basis, then that could be challenging. I think what I'm doing is highlighting how individual it is really. For some people, there's elements of it that are marvelous, the virtual working, the flexibility. For some, it might pose more challenges. I think, it's the key, and it's a really interesting topic, isn't it, as we come out of the pandemic and more employers are working out what does hybrid working mean for them.
Yeah.
The key thing is around flexibility for your neurodivergent workforce, really, really enabling them to work in an environment where they can really thrive.
And picking up on your point there around development and learning, I think that's I've heard that theme come up in conversations about the whole population, not just for neurodivergent individuals. And I think it's something that a lot of organizations are grappling with. Have you seen, Melissa, anyone that you think is doing this really well in an inclusive way?
I think what we're seeing more is a shift to learning in the moment. So I haven't got any specific examples of particular organizations that are doing particular things, but this move towards more learning in the moment and being able to access, whether that be online learning that you can just do by yourself, or whether that be perhaps working with a coach or a mentor to learn, peer coaching, peer mentoring, that's so powerful to help with that learning in the moment, to move people along, to just share what's going on for guidance and get some input and insight and direction is really valuable. So I think we went online and everything went big and virtual, and now there's this desire to get back to in person and connection and learning together. And I think it's just having that variety of learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe taking a few steps back and thinking about recruitment, because you talked a little bit earlier around the challenges of transition and the changes that 18 to 25-year-olds are dealing with on their journey from education into the world of work. So I guess we're probably thinking about apprenticeship programs, graduate programs, maybe some other entry-level roles. What should recruiters for those sorts of programs be thinking about and be considering, and maybe even doing differently to make sure their processes are neuro-inclusive?
It's interesting, isn't it? You might go to university, or you're passionate about perhaps one subject, and then you come in and you apply for a graduate role, and you're expected to demonstrate a broad range of skills. And I think that can be particularly difficult for neurodivergent candidates who may have a very, what we call kind of spiky profile. They might be quite specialist thinkers. So from a recruitment perspective, I think what's really important is thinking about what you're recruiting for and what are the required skills or the experience necessary for the role, and being really clear on that, so that you can almost like unbundle roles a little bit and think, actually, what are the core skills we're looking for, and what could this individual do in our organization? So I think one of the barriers can be that a number of employers will have broad competency frameworks, for instance, and they want to see evidence across that whole broad framework. The challenge is there are other opportunities to be flexible around that and look at the matching between what you might see in somebody's profile versus the opportunity within an organization, within a role that could be, could be quite niche. So rather than looking for the sort of broad range across the board, recognizing that you might have a slightly different profile in front of you, and how can that still work? And I think in some cases it can work brilliantly if you're able to unbundle some of these roles and just really niche down on what
yes, absolutely,
what the core skills. So I think that's one element.
That age-old, avoiding that age-old temptation of wanting to throw the kitchen sink at a job description.
Yes, and recycling old job descriptions,
yes,
and putting in everything that you think needs to be put in there when actually it may not. And by doing that, you may well be putting off a number of potential candidates that would be a great asset to your organization. So really thinking about being careful about what you're going out and looking for, what you're recruiting for. And then it's about starting with, well, what's your recruitment strategy? So starting at attraction side, how are you messaging to this talent pool? Are you showing that you're a neurodiverse friendly employer, and that you welcome neurodiverse talent? Why might a neurodivergent individual want to join you? What are you saying to them? How well do they think you understand their needs? How good are you at providing that personalized support? So getting that comfort over and the messaging over to that talent pool is really, really important. And then when you go into the recruitment process and you have your process outlined, it's about making sure that there are no barriers to through the application stages. And it can be really helpful to have a single point of contact for a neurodivergent individual.
Okay.
Encourage disclosure at application stage, have a single point of contact.
And Melissa, on that single point of contact, is that a named point of contact rather than a generic email address? Yeah.
Yes. I think a named contact that you might be able to discuss anything with. So could it be that the application, if there's an application form, is there a different way? If that is presenting any challenges, what might be alternatives? Do they maybe have questions about, well, what's the next stage? What does that look like? So they can, if they do disclose, then they've got somebody who they can talk to and work with on what those reasonable adjustments might be to the recruitment process. And the key thing there is, because they are all so different, what the needs of one person are so different to another. So I think having that single point of contact is a great way of them not losing talent as they go through the process. So they might have thought, right, you look like a great organization to join, and now I'm joining, I've taken that next step, but I've got so far in the process and I can't get any further because there's the barriers there, and they're barriers that you may not be aware of. So having something a little bit more personalized, I know that can be difficult to put in place when you're doing large scale recruitment programs, but I think hugely beneficial in ensuring that you're not losing any talent along the way.
And I guess if you're really serious as an organization about doing this properly, not just from a recruitment perspective, but just organization wide, actually it sets a really good example, and it says to candidates, we take this seriously. This matters to us. Your experience here is an example of what your experience would be like in the organization. So yeah, as you say, it's almost the attraction piece is equally as important, as well as thinking about the barriers.
Absolutely, it really is. And then ensuring that carries through when you get inside the organization, that it's not just the front that looks really good, that actually when you're in, you're supported.
Yeah.
Other areas during the recruitment process, I think it's looking at your recruitment process and ensuring that it's designed to draw out that potential and not screen out based on kind of a lack of evidence of those skills that aren't essential, a bit like what we were talking about before, and assessing that ability rather than maybe relying on the academics, particularly if they have been affected for whatever reason. So making sure that you can actually accurately measure potential and match potential. So candidates have got an opportunity to shine and show what they're capable of. And then again, reasonable adjustments at interview stage. So being really clear on the process. Reasonable adjustments at interview stage, they might be a variety of things. It might be about sharing interview questions up front, and I still, people find that one really difficult to get their head around. Like, why would you do that? But you want to give everybody an opportunity to demonstrate what they're capable of. So for some individuals, that can be really helpful. Or it might be having the questions written down at the same time as you might be saying them, so they've got a reference point to look at. It could be about making some environmental changes to where the interview is. It could be the candidate saying, look, I'm not, eye contact for me, it's overstimulating, for instance. So it's not that I don't want to make eye contact, it's just that I can't maintain eye contact and process what you've asked me for me to come up with a great response. So
Yeah.
that in itself could be a reasonable adjustment. So the interviewers just see, actually, yes, that's perfectly acceptable, and we're not going to mark you down on the fact that you didn't make eye contact. So there's just a few a few things there in terms of recruitment process that are probably worth recruiters thinking about.
Really useful. And then moving on through the candidate journey, turning that candidate into an employee, what do managers need to think about when onboarding and then developing neurodivergent individuals?
So if the person joining you has disclosed their neurodivergence, then you've got something to work with there in terms of, okay, how best do we support you? The managers that do this really well are almost accepting of the fact that they don't know the answers and there may not be a perfect solution, and they're happy to and support this kind of, they go on a journey with their employee, and they're happy to explore and be curious about what might work and think about what reasonable adjustments they might want to put in place, and will be very much led by the individual. So I think accepting that you can't get these things right straight away. An individual is joining a new organization. They've got to get a sense of the role, a sense of the cultural norms, how they navigate that, and then think about what's working for them and what could work better and how that might work better. I think managers have such an important role in nurturing team relationships. So bringing individuals in, helping build relationships, helping to build that psychological safety. Offering, having a mentor or a coach just to support with settling in and trying out some of these strategies that are going to be helpful is a great addition during onboarding.
And should that mentor or coach have a specialist understanding of neurodiversity, or is it less about that and more about something else?
I think it definitely helps. It really does help if you do have a good understanding of neurodiversity and how that shows up in individuals and how individual it is, in fact. So being able to explore that as a coach, knowing how to explore that as a coach, and having some ideas of strategies that might be helpful that they can try. So I think that's where then that sort of mentor role can work quite well, that you're able to share, well, actually we've supported, because sometimes individuals are not quite sure what's going to be helpful for them. And it's the same with the recruitment process as well, that having that single point of contact or having a mentor in your organization who can say, well, this is what's helped previous candidates or other employees. If you thought about this, it's just giving them some ideas and normalizing it, because there can be real, particularly when it comes to disclosure, there can be hesitation there because people don't want to be treated differently. They don't want to be seen as asking for anything special. So sharing with them that actually normalizing it and sharing that this is what other people have asked for, or this is what's worked for other people, it can just give them that confidence to say, okay, well, yeah, I'll give that a try. That might work well for me. It normalizes it. So I think that's really important. But going back to the manager role, I think regular check-ins is so important in the early days of onboarding somebody. So regular catch-ups and reviews, particularly reviews around different strategies, and thinking about being able to give really good feedback and ensure it's regular, it's really clear. You're being very clear on expectations. I think exploring preferences. So what are your preferred ways of working? What would work for you if you're an employer that is particularly flexible about where and when you work? Just, okay, what are your preferences then? How do we shape this role and the environment around you so you can really be at your best? So I think from a manager's perspective, it's the keeping in contact, being really clear on expectations, feedback, being curious, exploring strategies with them, ensuring that they can signpost them to any other support within the organisation that might be able to help them with some of those strategies. and just accepting that it's, it's an ongoing process and will require revisiting.
Yes, it's not one item on a checklist that once you've ticked it off, you don't
Yeah,
have to think about it
exactly.
again. Before we maybe move on to some of our older generations, maybe my last question, thinking about this sort of 18 to 25 year old age group, I think there'll be a lot of parents who are either already on this journey or who know they will be going on this journey at some point with their offspring. What should they be doing, or indeed not doing, to support?
I think for parents, their children will be going through these transitions, and it's supporting them through that. So I think helping them doing some of that thinking. What is it that they're passionate about? What is it that they want to do? Helping them explore options, helping them share what their concerns might be. Going and with change is difficult, and if you're leaving home for the first time and moving somewhere else, where might that place be? Can you go and visit various places, get a sense of what it might be like? I don't think it's really clear in terms of what support is available. So being able to find out and look at, so for instance, if you're applying to different universities, not just looking at the courses or the reputation of the university overall and the match, but for what you want to do, but also thinking, okay, well, what kind of support is available for neurodivergent students, and what might that look like, and what's the learning environment like? So helping ensure that the learning environment is fit for how your son, your daughter needs to learn at their best. Thinking about other environmental elements, so study spaces, what's the living accommodation like, all these different things. What's the technology like? Do you go and sit in one big lecture hall and that's the only option to learn? I'm thinking back to my days, you turn up to your lecture and you take notes and it's a big lecture hall. That can be hugely distracting. Do you get slides up front? Are there small learning groups? Really thinking about how you need to learn at your best. I think as a parent, maybe asking some of those questions that nobody else might be asking. I just don't. I'm not sure what that support looks like, and that transition from school through to university and then through to the workplace. You've really got to almost arm yourself with as much self-knowledge as possible and take it with you, because there isn't a form that comes with you that says, Melissa needs this and this, and needs change as we move forward and become start getting used to different environments and things like that. We have new challenges and different changes.
Constant evolution.
Yeah. And I think for parents, it's also exploring different options. So, okay, university, is it university? Is it into employment? Is it as apprenticeship? And helping with the weighing up the pros and cons of each of those options.
Absolutely. And now maybe thinking about the other end of the workforce from an age perspective. So individuals in their 50s and 60s that may be neurodivergent, do they face any different or additional challenges compared to what we've talked about already?
Well, they will have grown up at a very different time when the awareness wasn't there. So that, I think, one of the interesting areas is, well, if the awareness wasn't there, have they lived a large proportion of their life undiagnosed? And are they just at this point getting a diagnosis? So you imagine that could have meant years and years of masking. We talk about masking, it's kind of trying to show up as neurotypical as possible, and that's that masking, which can be exhausting and can have an impact on your well-being. So what's that meant? So that process of, they may be going through their own time of getting a diagnosis and coming to terms with that. And I think that age group, there are other things going on, menopause, real life changes that coupled with being neurodiverse, they can, it can be even more difficult time to navigate for individuals. So it's being aware of that. And maybe some are in a leadership role, and that that masking has been really, really important for them to get to the classic, what does it mean to be a leader? If you're in that age group, it's probably looked very different 20, 30 years ago to what it looks like today. So there could be a sense of vulnerability around disclosing your own neurodiversity, but you could also be a great ally. So I think, other things to think about there that are really linked to your identity and your professional identity as well. And I also think that we've focused and we've talked about recruitment and that outward, how you want to message to your future talent. But remembering that, if you are in this age group and you're in an organization that hasn't historically done much in this area and is now talking about it, you're going to, the people in your organization are going to hear different things coming out. They're going to see, actually, my organization is embracing neurodiversity, and that means it's safe now. So it's safe to share, or I might want to ask for some support. So just thinking that's real opportunity for employers to, as they're talking more about neurodiversity, knowing that they've probably got 15 to 20% perhaps of their own employee group who are neurodivergent, and it might encourage them to disclose and
absolutely
get the support that they need. So there's different challenges there.
Yes, really interesting. And Melissa, I know you get involved in a lot of neurodiversity coaching. Talk to me a little bit about how that works. What is it exactly?
It usually starts with that piece around understanding yourself in terms of your neurodiverse profile. So, and mentioned this before, this sort of spiky profile. So you might have extremely high ability in some areas and lower ability in others. So just kind of having that opportunity to understand and learn about your own neurodiverse profile is a good starting point. And I think with those profiles, they may well fluctuate according to the amount of stress you might be under, or any sensory the environment and any sensory inputs there that you're experiencing, and so that can positively or negatively influence performance. So it's sort of drawing attention to what they may be, so you can manage your environment more, and that is particularly challenging because we're expected to perform at a particular standard the whole time. Sort of this is how we perform, and performance is consistent. So being able to work with clients to help them identify and address those issues that might be affecting their performance, holding them back, thinking about what adjustments might be necessary, that's where the coaching can really help. And we work with clients to really help them build their own collection of strategies, so they can work at their best in the workplace. And that might be things that they're going to try themselves to help them with their day-to-day work, but it might be things that they need their employer to think about as well or put in place. So it helps build self-understanding. It offers them a safe, understanding and non-judgmental space for them to explore and try out different strategies. And I'm thinking about what you asked before, does a coach need to have specialist knowledge? And I'm an associate for Genius Within, and that's been an amazing, rich training ground for learning about neurodiversity and working with neurodivergent clients. I learned so much. So I think that has been massively helpful in my coaching practice, particularly to enable me to support this population. Helping with strategies. And one aspect can also be around communication challenges and expressing their needs. So being clear on what their needs are, and then getting comfortable expressing those and building confidence so they can really advocate for themselves. ultimately the organization benefits massively because they're coming forward and having that open dialogue about what their needs are, and then together they can try out and discuss what these adjustments, and often these adjustments are not major things, and probably good for most people, in fact.
And our tools, so Wave specifically, get used a lot in executive coaching. Is there a place for those tools in neurodiversity coaching? Are they still helpful there, or do you look to other things to support?
I think it depends what the goal of the coaching is. So if you are doing executive coaching and your client is neurodivergent, and maybe or if you're running a leadership program and you're using psychometrics, and you've within your cohort you've got neurodivergent individuals, then I think anything that helps towards developing that deeper understanding of yourself and builds self-awareness, and also really focuses on creating the best working environment for you, then I think they can still be really useful. And I focus on that environment fit. It's so important. How we show up in our environment might be quite different to who we are underlying. So that masking piece is an interesting one. To what degree you might be adjusting. So that the environment piece is really interesting. And I think anything that can really help identify your strengths is a great benefit to your own personal development and leadership development as well.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so I think from looking at use of tools, just being clear on what's the intention behind using them? What is it supporting? Is it supporting a development discussion? Or is it, what's the purpose behind it? So being really clear on intent. And then when individuals are engaging with these tools, just thinking about any impact from an executive functioning point of view. So questions, how they're phrased, is there anything that could be misinterpreted, making sure that the questions are really clear, and being aware of the risk of over analysis of the tool itself, and perhaps you need to start looking at the relationship between different questions. So sometimes people can get, and you'll know this from using Wave, that when you do feedback, sometimes clients can get quite involved in the design and the questions, and that takes away from the value of having the conversation and is self-report. So just looking at what comes out of that self-report, so focusing on the output and some of the learning insights that can be gained there, and that comes down to having a good qualified coach there to talk you through the feedback and help you get that insight. So I think tools used, well designed, where you're really clear on the intention behind them, what they're supporting, and in the right hands and debriefed in the right way, can be really valuable in just aiding self-understanding and helping with development.
Absolutely. We're seeing a bit of a rise in the use of 360 assessments for development. I think maybe possibly because of a trend for organizations to, aspire to this kind of feedback culture, coaching culture. Those are two phrases that I hear quite a lot at the moment. Is there anything specific that we need to think about when using 360 assessments with neurodivergent individuals?
I think it comes back to some of the same things around the intention behind using them. So what is the intention? Is it for development purposes? Is there a performance review element? Just need to be really clear on what's being measured, and why. Fairness, I think, is really important. So are you rolling out a 360 program for everyone to engage in? Or in the wrong hands, sometimes it can be used as an indirect way of providing feedback to someone, because you're uncomfortable providing that feedback face to face. So I think making sure it's being done for the right purposes, and these tools are great, but I think you have to have psychological safety first, so that you've got, and that's core to developing any kind of coaching culture and feedback culture, that you've got that psychological safety, you've invested, and that you've got a team that are aware and have understanding of neurodiversity as well. I think probably where it could be linked to performance, making sure there's a revision of any core competencies. So you're providing feedback on the role, on aspects of the role and the job, and the skills that are required to deliver and perform in that role, or potential for the future. So being really clear on what it is that you're measuring. So I think, and again, the feedback mechanism. So there are some tools out there that you get a report and you have to make sense of it yourself as the individual. How helpful is that to make sense of feedback? What's the feedback on? So I think having robust tools where the feedback is around your actual role and your performance in the role and what's going to help you, and having somebody who's trained in that tool to give you that feedback to help you learn. And I think it's really advantageous if you've got that self-report there as well, so you can start to identify any blind spots.
Absolutely, yes. I'm a big advocate of using self-report alongside 360.
Yeah.
But panning out a little bit now, Melissa, and thinking about being neuro-inclusive more generally, what have you seen some organisations doing really well?
I think they have really embraced inclusion by design in their processes, procedures, the messaging. And what I see the organisations that do what stands out for me are the quality of the managers, the ability of the managers to be open, to engage, to have these open conversations, open dialogue, learn, sit alongside the neurodivergent employee and support them in the way that they need supporting. That's really does stand out for me. And I, when I work with clients and their manager together, that for me is a real insight into the quality of management and leadership there, and it's often a reflection of the investment that the organisation has made.
And what are some of the common pitfalls you see organisations fall into?
Yeah, I guess it's the opposite of that. So it's failing to make those systemic changes internally. And focusing too much on the external messaging and thinking about recruitment. So it becomes a bit of a diversity tick box exercise rather than them looking at their systems and processes, sort of auditing themselves and redesigning so they are really inclusive by design. And the danger there is that you then overpromise and you fail people when they come into the organisation. They find that they're not supported. And that's something we really have to work hard to prevent because of the impact on confidence there. A lot of these individuals have faced a number of challenges, a number of barriers. So we have to do everything we can to support them. So it would be better for an organisation to hold their hands up and say, we're not quite ready yet, but we're going on this journey and we're going to do it properly, rather than quickly push something out and try and get their shop window looking good when actually behind the scenes, it's not there yet.
For those organisations who are at the beginning of that journey, it feels like there could be a lot to do. Where do they start? What's the first thing that they should be doing?
I think thinking about inclusivity as more of a inclusive mindset, inclusive practices that do look beyond diversity. So do they have a shared understanding and a shared desire around inclusivity and what that means? And I think it starts with that audit, looking inside and internally and not over-promising. So, and taking your time with it. So recognizing, I think really starting with recognizing that you're going to have a proportion of your own existing workforce who are neurodivergent. So actually perhaps starting there. So how do you support them? How are you supporting them? Do you know who they are? How might you encourage disclosure and open up some dialogue? Do you need to start upskilling your managers on neurodiversity and how to navigate these conversations? So I think that's a starting point, is taking those steps to make your current neurodivergent employees feel valued, feeling part of the team and supported, so they can fully contribute towards the organization. So start inside, internally first.
You mentioned just before, Melissa, about it actually being better if you're not there yet to put your hands up and say, we're at the beginning of this journey. I feel that might feel like quite a scary thing for a lot of organizations to do, when the mantra for everyone seems to be, let's focus on neurodiversity. We need to tell everybody we're neuro-inclusive. And I think that's quite an interesting way to think about, because the danger, I guess the irony, is that by doing that, you're actually making yourself potentially less neuro-inclusive, because you're saying, come on in, everybody, we're going to be great at supporting you. But then you're essentially setting people up to fail. That's, I think, a really interesting takeaway.
It is. It's a real risk, and we go back to this inclusion by design, because if you get it right by your design, then whether it's neurodiversity, whether it's physical disability, whether you're designing for that in your processes once, and you may keep revisiting them, but you're talking about inclusivity, and it means that those processes, the procedures, the policies, everything lend themselves so favorably to supporting a really diverse workforce, whatever makeup that looks like. And neurodiversity is an important one, but there's no point to sort of just jumping on the latest hot topic and saying, yes, we're doing something on this. Otherwise, you just be accused of whether it be greenwashing or purpose washing or whatever else. Yes. It has to be authentic.
Absolutely.
And it's, there's learning there and acceptance of being, accepting that you don't know the answers and that you're learning. And with that comes a bit of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And I think that's okay. Mm-hmm. I think that's actually will build more trust and authenticity, and that's what we're actually asking from a number of organizations and of employees to be authentic. So as employers, we need to be authentic as well.
So what about organizations that are a little bit more mature, maybe further on in that journey? What are the things that they now should be thinking about in order to really push themselves even further forward?
I think it's about sharing what they're doing with other organisations, sharing good practice, collaborating for the greater good. You said before about actually for some organisations that are early on in this journey, it can feel quite daunting. Well, if you've got those that are further on, then they can share what they've gone through, and that can help accelerate your progress and your work. So I would, we're all about, using business as a force for good and a force for change, and sometimes we can put down the competitiveness, to put that to one side and see that on certain things it's really worthwhile collaborating and sharing for the sake of supporting community out there. Absolutely. So I think that's something that those organisations can do. I professionally have got a growing interest in teams and done further study in team coaching. So I think for me, for those organisations that have kind of got a lot of this cracked, it's about focusing, away just from the individual to thinking about the team dynamics, and moving more towards team outcomes. How do you build psychological safety in a team? How do you encourage learning and sharing about individual differences? How do you leverage those different strengths across a team? How do you ensure a team can work really effectively together? How are they going to interact? How do you help with rapport building, understanding, respecting different communication differences? So I think investment in teams and how we come together to work as a team and understand and celebrate and work with individual differences across the board is a real area that I think organizations can be focusing on more. So moving away from the individual and really thinking about the team.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting stuff. I look forward to following what you do there, and I hope you practice what you preach, Melissa, in terms of sharing that with us all.
Absolutely. Will do.
I think that's a great place for us to finish, and say a big thank you for sharing your experience, your thoughts, your ideas in this space. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you very much, Melissa, for joining us.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode of The Deep Dive. If you have, please remember to like and subscribe to stay tuned for all our latest content. If you want more information on any of the topics you've heard today, check out the show notes for case studies, resources, and articles. I've been Hannah Mullaney. See you next time on The Deep Dive.